Banditry is on the increase in northern Nigeria. This is a region with many security problems, chief among them the Boko Haram's insurgency. In the north central region, herdsmen militancy has become a key security concern. Northwest Nigeria, which used to be the bastion of security and stability, has been hit hard by armed banditry. Armed banditry in the northwestern states of Zamfara, Kaduna, and Katsina has reached alarming heights in recent years. Bandits terrorize villages with impunity. They have actually settled in some of the northwest states, setting up fortified enclaves in the hinterland and on the frontiers from where they plot and carry out their operations. What drives banditry? What are the impacts and implications for Nigeria? And what could be done to effectively tackle the growing menace? With us to discuss these issues and others is a security expert, Dr. Kabir Adamu, the Managing Director, Baking Consulting Ltd. Dr. Adamu, it's a pleasure having you on SaharaTV, sir.
The pleasure is mine. Good morning.
Let me start by asking Dr. Adamu, the pervasive armed banditry and its associated threats to human security in the northwest region of Nigeria, particularly Zamfara, Katsina, Kaduna, Sokoto, and Niger states, have become a subject of national security and public concern. What, in your expert opinion, seems to be driving this menace at this time, the upsurge that we are having in recent times?
It's a combination of factors, some of which are pure, security, national security. Some of them are sociological. The others are political, and then others are the context within which Nigeria finds itself, this geopolitical, strategic context with which Nigeria finds itself. So I'll quickly start with the most obvious one, environmental. Climate change has impacted livelihoods. It has affected the way some people used to live their lives, including herders and farmers. And it has affected their access to resources, land, and in the case of herders, their livestock. And so you are seeing geopolitical movements as a result of this climate change. Herders that before could find forage for their livestock in certain locations will now have to move to other locations. Farmers that before were able to farm on land and be able to feed their families, for some reasons now that land is not enough. So they would need to expand their land and in that process encroach into grazing reserves of these herders. And so the consequence of this is a shift in the geopolitical balance that is now driving some aspect of the conflict. We can also talk about the component that I spoke about, national security, the porosity of our border. And in discussing that, we can also talk about the special, unique geopolitical context that Nigeria has found itself. We are one of the only Anglophone countries in the sub-region, surrounded by Francophone countries. And because of the unique geographical nature that we have, sometimes herders want to come here, especially during the dry season, to come and farm. And then you now accompany that with the porous borders. So the transhumans movement of both livestock and humans into the region, unfortunately, is not regulated, partly because there is a sub-regional agreement that allows this free movement. And on our own, and as a country, we have not come up with a measure to contain or control or even monitor this movement. And so when you add the third factor, which is the proliferation of small arms and light weapons within the sub-region to this second factor that I mentioned, then you now have a situation where gunmen sometimes hide under the guise of this transhuman movement and bring in guns. Tied to this is what happened in Libya. It has created a situation where you have a huge pool of arms within the sub-region, and you have a readily available market in Nigeria. And so the possibility that those arms are finding their way down to Nigeria through these porous borders And then because of this geopolitical context that I mentioned, Nigeria unfortunately has been at the receiving end. Now we can also talk about, I mentioned sociological factors, and there are several of those factors, but for the purpose of our conversation, I will tie it down to what has been described as the failure of the family system, where the values that you and I perhaps was inculcated in us by our parents to understand the difference between right and wrong. For certain reasons, this particular crop of gunmen have not received those values. Those that are, put forward this theory of the opinion that as a society we have abandoned this crop of people. They do not have the Western education that we're privileged to have. Neither do they have the religious education that most of us have. So they've grown, they are now adults, as it were, they've grown up without a value system. And that's why you are seeing the atrocities that they are committed. The other side of this theory are those who believe that they are angered, their livelihood, which is mainly either herding or farming, has been destroyed, either by the climate change I spoke about earlier on, or by the criminal effect of cattle rustling. When their herd or livestock was stolen, they reported it to the security agencies. And instead of the security agencies listening to them and finding out who stole their cattle or livestock, they were now victimized. Some of them were arrested, extorted, and at the end of the day, they became angry. And so those that are putting forward this theory are saying we're dealing with a group of angry people because their livelihood has been taken away from them, and the state that's supposed to protect them ended up extorting them. Now, that brings us to the final point, which is the failure of the state to enforce the criminal justice system, which is firstly to catch offenders and then punish offenders. We have a situation where repeatedly you are seeing atrocities of all kinds. I mentioned cattle rustling, then the banditry we're talking about, and several other forms of criminality that are not being punished. So the criminal justice system has three components: the law enforcement component, the legal component, which is the courts, and then the final one, which is the correctional services. Now, all of these three components have issues with them. They have challenges, and so there is a failure of the administration of criminal justice system. So tie all of these 5-6 things that I mentioned together. That is the reason for the increase in banditry across the country.
Thank you very much for such a brilliant analysis. There's been, let's look at the government strategy. There's been several army operations, military operations that have been launched, but most have been largely ineffective. Nigeria's response has also been compromised by the decade-long war with insurgents, with security forces stretched. Armed groups have been able to operate with little or no resistance in the Northwest. Why is the Nigerian army continue to struggle to contain the insurgents' violence in the North?
I mean, the answer is really simple. If you put into context the 5-6 things I've mentioned earlier on, then it's readily understandable that the solution to the challenge is not a military solution. Each of the reasons that I've mentioned, in profiling solutions, we would need to look at each and every one of them. I took time to explain climate change and the impact it has, on the banditry. And there is no amount of military or kinetic force that you use to, solve that climate change challenge. It would have to be a climate change solution where you look at the root causes of the climate change, the type of agricultural land policy systems we're adopting, and how to now change that. I talked about porosity of our borders. That is not a military solution. Our immigration and as well as custom regimes and systems would probably be the solution to that. And then, of course, the kind of relationship we have with our neighbors would also be another solution. And to that extent, I know that state governors in places like Katsina, Zamfara have attempted, Borno, of course, have attempted to improve the relationship they have with the neighboring states that we were aligned with. But the federal government would have complemented that by ensuring that we have a better and stronger relationship to ensure joint monitoring, especially of the border system, because frankly, it's mutually beneficial to both sides to have better control of the border. So clearly, it's not a military solution. It would never be. It would be like, your bucket is leaking, and then all you do is to drop the bucket on the ground, hoping that will stop the leakage. That's kind of what we're doing. We need to plug all of these holes in the 5-6 things I've mentioned. And then, of course, in fact, it can never be a military solution. It has to be a security solution where all the security agencies, and by the way, we have 27 ministries, departments, and agencies that are involved in security in Nigeria. And for this solution to work, all of these 27 will have to work together towards the goal of ensuring that simple term I used, which is the effectiveness of our criminal justice system, the administration of the criminal justice system. All of these 27 together will have to work together to ensure that the criminal justice system punish offenders. If a bandit goes and commit whatever act of criminality, let the criminal justice system, with a combination of all of these 27 agencies, work together to arrest him, present him before a court of competent jurisdiction, let him be tried. If he's found guilty, then let him be sentenced with whatever penalty the Constitution says that act commit. So it's really not a military solution, and that is why we're where we are. The military has carried on, and honestly, it's like we're attempting to fetch water with a basket.
That's sad. Still talking about rethinking strategies from the state government themselves. Some of the state governors in the region have resorted to signing controversial and oftentimes secretive peace agreements with bandits and vigilantes now to stop the killings. But the deals often seem to unravel at some point in time, and it breaks apart. One begins to wonder. There's also been calls for state and community policing. What's your view and perspective on that, sir?
Okay, I'll break down your questions into two. The first one is to discuss the peace agreement by the state governors, and then the second one is to talk about the policing arrangement. Exactly. Now, with regards to the attempt at negotiating some form of peace with the bandits by the state governors, in itself, it's not a bad idea. All conflicts somehow have to reach a point where you need to negotiate peace agreement, especially where you get a sense that this is a civil conflict involving citizens, not external aggressors, as it were. So that is the premise of this discussion. I mean, we can have another conversation that says the aggressors are external invaders, but for the purpose of this conversation, let's assume they are citizens that are doing this. So there's nothing wrong with that, attempting to reach a peace agreement that would bring all of this to an end. My understanding is that the state governors don't have the capacity for such, wholesome negotiation. Call it whether it's a disarmament, de-radicalization, or whatever form of negotiation, requires diplomatic skill sets that only trained diplomats and state actors would have those type of skills. Unfortunately, our state governments over time have not involved themselves in those kind of diplomatic negotiations. So they lack those skill sets. And I would have thought they would try to get a specialist to assist them in designing a demobilization negotiation program, a DDR program that unfortunately I haven't seen that. None of the state governors that have attempted to do that have come up with a framework for such negotiation, and that's why it's failing. For you to negotiate, the first thing you do is to reach at least some consensus over the framework of the negotiation, and then demobilize the other side, collect their weaponry, block the sources of the weaponry, and then give them in exchange something to do. Either you put them through a program that would change their mindset, which is why I brought in the radicalization. Or you give them a skill set that would make them economically viable citizens. But you don't just pay them stipends, money, with the hope that that would be enough for them to stop the atrocities they were committing. No, they've been doing it for a long time. They've seen the benefits. And so the money you give them will probably just be a stopgap, but eventually they'll go back to what they're doing. And so really that's why the state initiatives have failed. Now, the second part of your question, the policing arrangement. Currently, the Constitution provides only for federal policing arrangements. We can talk about the necessity of state policing arrangements. As a security specialist, I can tell you that, yes, there is a need for state and even community policing arrangement. As an example, if we can have the discussion, road safety, as an example, that's the policing department that, because of our peculiarity in Nigeria, has been removed from the police. I see nothing wrong with making road safety a state arrangement where each state should have leadership and control over its road safety arrangement. Let it have control over movement of traffic within its state and regulate that. So, and as well as several other policing arrangements. I see nothing wrong with that, but that would require a constitutional amendment. Under the current arrangement, security is in the exclusive list. And unfortunately, I do not see there is a political will to change that at the moment. But from a professional point of view, I can tell you that there are several components of policing that can be better handled at the state level.
Now, let me take you back a little bit. There have been reports, so to say, with regards to jihadist elements of the Boko Haram insurgents trying to establish connections with some of these bandit groups. Are we seeing these connections? What are the implications for the future, especially with regards to the security architecture of the North and of Nigeria in its entirety? If there is ever going to be a connection between the jihadist movements and the bandits, and this de-escalates.
Okay, so first off, this is not new. As far back as 2012, one of the factions that, the first faction actually to break out of the parent body, which is the Jamaat al-Ahlisin al-Dawat al-Jihad, that everybody calls Boko Haram, is called Ansaru. It had its operational base in northwest Nigeria. For those who study this, you would remember when a German engineer was killed in Kano. It was that group that abducted him. And then there was a French engineer that was abducted in Katsina, and he escaped somewhere in Zaria. I think, if I remember well, around 2013 or 2014. So yes, and then you also probably remember the construction workers in somewhere in Bauchi State. I think about 7 of them Lebanese that were abducted by this particular group, Ansaru. So that's the first thing to note, that this is exactly not new. They've been, but of recent, and this is the more worrisome fact which ties into your question, we were seeing 2 fronts being opened up for association. I'm using this word now professionally between gunmen or criminals, call them whatever, or bandits, and these jihadist groups. So one of the front is in local or Nigerian jihadist groups, the Jamaat al-Ahlisin al-Dawat al-Jihad, headed by Shekau, reaching out to the bandits that are operating in the northwest. He's under pressure for a lot of reasons. The numbers of his followers are reducing because they are abandoning his ideology, as it were. They are more comfortable with the other ideology of the Islamic State in West Africa province, which is also in another ideological sort of quagmire, and its factions are emerging from within ASWAP. But for the purposes of this conversation, Shekau's faction is reaching out to the bandits that are operating in the northwest to expand his followership. It's strategic for him. He's under pressure in the northeast. So the best way perhaps to increase membership is to reach out to these bandits. Remember, I mentioned earlier on that these bandits don't have religious knowledge, neither do they have Western education. So it's very easy for him to sell this idea that he has to them, especially if he can convince them of some form of support in terms of weapons and other protection support, including money, because he's got the profile, especially if abduction occurs and he uses his profile, more money will be gotten from the victims as against if the bandits were the ones that are driving the negotiation. So that's one front from the Nigerian local jihadists, including ISWAP. While Shekau is doing his own attempt at recruitment of the bandits, ISWAP, to the Islamic State in West Africa province, is also doing their own attempt at recruitment. So when, for instance, in February this year, a convoy of the Emir of Potiskum was traveling from Zaria to Kaduna, and the convoy was attacked, we were told that it was ISWAP that carried that attack. But I know from my research and findings that it was a bandit group operating under the flag of ISWAP that carried out the attack. And then ISWAP claimed the attack. So that's why I said I use the word association professionally. These are groups' attempt at recruitment, but the recruitment will be loose to the extent that it will be one of association and not ownership. Now that I mentioned that's one front. Now the other front, which is also very worrisome, is the Sahel region. As you know, a significant portion of northern Nigeria falls under the Sahel, including parts of the northwest, Sokoto as an example, and then some parts of the northeast also fall under this Sahelian region. Now, as you're aware, there is a proliferation of jihadist groups in the Sahel. And one of the things we know is that those groups are moving southwards into northern Nigeria. And so the most obvious example I'll give you is the recent abduction of the American in Niger. He was abducted in Niger, and then he was held in Sokoto. And then we know when he was rescued. It was clearly a criminal group that carried out that attack, but they were going to sell him to a jihadist group before the Americans came in. So clearly there are jihadist groups operating in that region who are moving southwards, downwards into northwestern Nigeria. And if we do not take measures to prevent that, then we may see another jihadist front opening up in northwestern Nigeria in the near future, unfortunately.
That's quite grim. Let's round this off, and now to put this into proper context and perspective for our viewers, what must be done, or what should be done at this point in time to effectively fight this armed banditry in northern Nigeria and address the hinterland peculiar security challenges at this point in time?
So there are, counterterrorism has identified about 13 measures for implementing a good counterterrorism strategy. The reason why I'm bringing in terrorism is because this is, on the one hand, it's banditry, but then we've also agreed that the terrorists are attempting to associate with bandits. So whatever strategy we adopt has to have this counterterrorism approach. So that's number one. We need to note that. The second point is to emphasize coordination. I mentioned at the beginning that there are 27 agencies involved in security in Nigeria, ministries, departments, and agencies. Now they need to work together as one. In Hausa, there is a saying we run together and we escape together. If we are working in silos, like we're doing at the moment, then these guys are cooperating. They are sharing intelligence, they are sharing weaponry, they're sharing tactics, and frankly, they will defeat us. So with all sense of responsibility, that's number one. We need to work together. This competition, rivalry, unhealthy one that we're seeing needs to stop. Better coordination is the way to go. All these 27 agencies need to come together and identify the goal and work towards that goal. And we've talked about the goal here, containing and eradicating this menace. So that's their goal. It's not a competition. It's survival, really, of the region and the country, as it were. The second point is intelligence. Our intelligence collection capabilities as a country is extremely low at the moment. I can give you several examples. Things happen and we're not aware, or even where we're aware, the right government departments fail to take action. So we need to enhance that intelligence capabilities. This is not a public issue for public discussion, but those who know what intelligence is, especially national intelligence, know what I'm talking about. We need to enhance that. Countries that are ahead, that have an edge in today's world, using intelligence. And that's what we need to use for us to survive. Then I also talked about the criminal justice system. When you have a criminal issue, there are the 101 of criminology speaks about the crime triangle. Now the crime triangle has 3 components. If you understand those 3 components and tinker those 3 components, then believe me, you will solve the crime situation. These components are: 1, the opportunity to commit the offense. The second one is the ability of the offender to commit the offense. Then the third one is the desire of the offender to commit the offense. Now you need to understand these 3 things and then tinker them within the criminal justice system. Earlier when I mentioned the 3 things that are involved in the criminal justice system: law enforcement, the courts, and then the correctional services. Now, how do you tinker these 3 things? Number 1 is increase the risk of apprehension. Let the offender know that if he commits the act, you will apprehend him. The moment he knows that, he would think twice before he commits the risk. But the situation where we are today, where they commit it and then get away with it, that's why you see a continuation of the issue. The second one is increase the effort. Let it be that it's not just everybody that can wake up and become a bandit or a kidnapper or a criminal. Let it be that it's a very difficult thing to do. The youths, the 40 million plus youths that are out of job or for one reason or the other are not happy with the job they're doing. Let it not be that they are looking at kidnapping and the lucrativeness of kidnapping and say, well, all I need to do is to get an AK-47 at probably 5,000 naira and then, or rent it and then go in and I'll do a successful kidnap activity. So that's number 2. We need to increase the effort. And in speaking about increasing the effort, there are several ungoverned spaces in Nigeria, especially in northern, northwestern, and north central Nigeria. We need to dominate those ungoverned spaces. Now, for the purposes of this discussion, there are 2 levels of ungoverned spaces. A few of them belong to the federal government. The majority of them belong to the state government. Sambisa Forest belongs to the state government, not to the federal government. In Kaduna, the Birningwari Forest belongs to the state government, not to the federal government. So this is purely a state government issue. They need to dominate those spaces. They need to come up with ideas, either in terms of agricultural or technological ideas or surveillance within those ungoverned spaces. And that would make it difficult for those guys to hide and come out and commit their actions. And the third one is to, and for me this is the most important one, reduce the reward to the offender. When he commits the act, let him know that he's not going to get any reward. I'm not saying that we should come up with a policy that says no payment of ransom. It will be futile, because I mean, if a loved one is abducted, we will pay ransom. But let's come up with technology to trace that ransom payment, and then whoever makes contact with that ransom payment, we arrest him and we prosecute him. In today's world, I can tell you as a security and risk management specialist, there is technology for that. We already have the platform, our cashless policy. We just need to implement that cashless policy. We have an agency called NFIU, Financial Intelligence Unit. It has the capabilities for that, but it's not working. I told you earlier on that there are 27 agencies in Nigeria. They need to work together. Remember, we're talking about the administration of criminal justice system using these 3 things that I mentioned. And if we do this, working as one, then believe me, the goal of containing and eradicating this will be very easy. It's not rocket science. It's just for us to be politically active and to have the commitment to do this.
Dr. Kabir Adamu, thank you so much for your insightful analysis, and we appreciate your comments as far as these issues are concerned. We hope we can reach out to you once again.